Identify the tag structure. Gabby here from bootcamp.com, and in this dissection here, we're looking at a sagittal view of the pelvis. So to orient ourselves first, more anteriorly, right over here, is where we're going to be able to find the pubic symphysis. So the pubic symphysis is the connection of where the two pubic bones articulate with each other along the anterior aspects of the pelvis. So that being said, right over here is going to be the anterior aspect. And as we move posterior to the pelvis, we're going to be able to find the sacrum as well as the coccyx. So this area here will represent posterior. Now within the pelvic cavity, we can find some organs that are found more anteriorly, such as the urinary bladder. We move posterior to the urinary bladder. We're going to be able to find the uterus as well as the cervix. And posterior, normally we'd be able to find the rectum, but the rectum itself has actually been removed away from this dissection, along with all the other additional abdominal organs. Now you can imagine that the pelvic bones actually come together to form this bowl that actually sits at the base of the trunk. Now within this bowl, there are these organs that sit nicely, so the urinary bladder, the uterus, as well as the rectum. They sit nicely within this bowl and are essentially anchored and supported by this sheet of muscle. So you can imagine that there's a small sheet of muscle that is found underneath these organs that actually help anchor and support them in place. Now it's a bit difficult to tell with the sagittal view how these pelvic muscles form this sort of diaphragm that really supports these organs. In this particular dissection though, we're able to see the left side of that bowl, or of those muscles that make up the bowl. So just to orient ourselves, so posterior right here, we can see some nerves that are essentially emerging from the spinal cord and merging together. So here's going to be the lumbosacral plexus, where a lot of the nerves that are traveling to the lower limb and to the areas of the pelvis are going to be originating from. Now anterior and medial to this lumbosacral plexus, so remember we're looking at a sagittal view, so the midline of the body is right over here, and here would be more lateral, right towards the left side. So anterior and medial to the lumbosacral plexus right over here, we're going to be able to identify a muscle that attaches to the ischial spine all the way to the sacrum and the coccyx. This muscle right over here is the coccygeus muscle. We see another muscle that essentially travels in the opposite direction, where it will originate along the internal aspect of the obturator membrane. So remember that the obturator foramen, right, is the hole on the anterior aspects of the pelvis that allow for the passageway of the obturator artery, nerve, and vein. So the obturator internus muscle, the muscle belly, is going to sit on the inside of that obturator foramen, versus obturator externus is going to sit on the external side of the obturator membrane. In this case right over here, we're looking at the obturator internus because we're inside the pelvis. So the obturator internus muscle is responsible for a variety of functions, including lateral rotation or external rotation of the hip, and it's also going to help transversely abduct the thigh as well. So coccygeus, and then we have obturator internus. We see another muscle that sits more inferiorly to these muscles over here, and this specifically are the muscles that are actually going to make up the majority of the pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor, as I was mentioning earlier, are those muscles that form this muscular diaphragm that sit underneath the pelvic organs. So this muscle will continue on, where it will sit underneath the pelvic organs and support these pelvic organs in place. So this muscle specifically is called the levator ani muscles. Now remember that the levator ani muscles are composed of 3 different muscles with 3 different attachment points. We have the iliococcygeus, which goes to the coccyx and eventually to the ilium. We have the pubococcygeus, which goes to the pubic bone to the coccyx. And then lastly, we have the puborectalis, which goes to the pubic bone and then eventually to the rectum. So within this levator ani muscle, we actually have openings where the vaginal canal and where the urethra and the urinary bladder, as well as the rectum, will actually pierce through. So it's super important that we strengthen these muscles in order to provide enough integral support to these organs. Now, you may have heard of certain cases of urinary or fecal incontinence, which can occur when these pelvic floor muscles become weakened. However, back to our question here. So here we're identifying the muscles that form the pelvic floor, and the answer for our question over here is going to be the levator ani.